If you enjoy unwinding with a cup of coffee while listening to captivating stories, I invite you to subscribe and become a part of our growing community. This first story we'll be presenting you has elements of sci-fi, romance, sports, and horror. Now, without further ado, I'm excited to present Delivery Message Protocol Light Novel Volume 1. Chapter 1. The gritty air was rough on Kaho's throat. Kaho coughed into a tissue, another black phlegm crater carving itself into the paper. She grimaced and wiped her mouth on her palm. The streets were vacant. Few dared come out of their shelters. But this used to be her home. The canal where she used to sit with her loved ones had been drained long ago by the rich and influential. She swallowed the lump in her throat and coughed again. Her tonsils felt like they'd been submerged in acid. The searing pain from each wheezy, labored cough coursed through her. Her eyes stung, water trickling down her cheeks behind her visor. What was the point of this anymore? Each time she dared go out, it was more miserable than the last. Her bloated, empty stomach churned, hunger pangs leaving her hunched over, her bare neck exposed to the heat. It was blistering. She could feel it. The heat bore down from the angry yellow sky, making her itch. She reached to the exposed skin of the nape of her neck and felt the small prickling spots coming to the surface. Her nails raked across the sore skin. She winced, feeling the fresh air on her skin. She'd raked it raw again and left a new layer of skin exposed. Kaho groaned, leaning on the crumbling wall of what had once been the local
where the
dojo.
elderly once learned self-defense. She was wheezing again. She should go inside, peel open the sliding doors of the dojo, and wait to rot away like the rest of the world. New blisters prickled her forearms as her puckered, veiny fingers scratched scabs and sores. A lone rickety jeep, on lopsided, ill-fitted wheels, upturned dust and ash under their tracks. A woman shouted into a megaphone, but Kaho couldn't hear her. The few clouds overhead knitted together, darkening. A pit formed in her stomach as she gazed up at the clouds. When was the last time she had been able to appreciate the rain? A siren wailed overhead, muffled by the wind that seemed to call her name. Cow! A woman's voice sang. Kaho yawned into her fist, her skin unmarred from whatever had been happening in her mind. She stretched, her hands grasping for her alarm clock to silence it, only to hear her mother call her again. "I'm awake," she shouted back. "Good. Don't want to be late on your first day of school." Kaho's mother replied, "Your lunch is all ready for you, lovely girl." Kaho sighed, flopping back against her pillows. Trust her mother to wake up in the middle of the night and make bento boxes for her kids. Kaho would be surprised if her older brother, Taiga, who was probably already out on a run, hadn't also been subject to tiny hot dogs cut to look like squid, pineapple slices, and rice balls for his first day of work, his first day of a new job. Kaho stretched her legs, but the blanket didn't move with her. Her duvet felt heavy, like it was being weighed down. She sat up, taking her phone from her nightstand, and looked over her quilt and saw the guilty shape of one of her cats. It was Tama. She was curled up in a ball by her knees, her little pink nose twitching as she dreamed. She snapped a picture of the snoozing cat
and sent it with a good morning text to her boyfriend, Tatsuya. Tatsuya had already sent her a good morning text, along with a photo of his neighbor's cat prowling outside his house. Jinenji was a little monster, always scrounging for extra food and cuddles, but Tatsuya loved the little black ball of fur, even if he wouldn't admit it. Love wasn't a word Tatsuya used, but she knew he felt it. He replied to her photo of Tama with a hard eyes emoji, and Kaho squealed. She picked her cat up, waking her up. She scrabbled against her pajamas, limbs flailing as she rocked her, cooing, peppering her little ginger head with kisses. "Tatsuya loves you, Tama," she sang. Tama leapt from her arms and strode from the room, tail erect as she stomped out. With Tama firmly exiled from the quilt, Kaho made her bed. She crossed her room and moved her art supplies out of harm's way. She'd been working with watercolors yesterday, and although the canvas was lacking a detailed scene, there were plenty of colors bleeding into one another. A base layer for her to sketch onto. She went to her desk and put her drawing tablet on charge. She'd fallen asleep halfway through a sketch. Again. Someone, probably Taiga, had moved it off her quilt, so she didn't crush it or crack it in her sleep. She would have to thank him later, she supposed, stretching her arms over her head and proceeding to warm up her sleep-addled muscles, another part of her life she'd adopted from her older brother. She'd always copied his morning stretches from when he was still a competing athlete. She was almost done when her mom called back up to her. "Kaho, can you jump in the shower now, please? I need to run water in a few," her mom called. "Yes, Mom!" She could hear her little sister Himiko pottering about downstairs. She pranced in the kitchen, rattling the walls like a bull in a china shop. She skipped, singing about the first day of school and playing with her friends. She warbled about looking forward to lunch, listing an exquisite banquet of theoretical meals she could be having: fresh brioche with red bean paste, animal crackers, but only the lions, a whole mango, and a papaya. Rice balls filled with rich beef and 4 different candies. She wanted a bottle of Ramoon and a bright blue can of American soda, Fanta, and she wanted Twinkies. Kaho had already gone into the bathroom and even over the steaming water, and her own humming as she shaved her legs, making sure she hadn't missed a spot yesterday, especially in her knee ditch. She could hear Himeko talking about filet mignon and chocolate cannolis and dauphinoise potatoes. Himeko really was a fiend for food. Even as she left the bathroom, her sister was still nattering about food. That much Kaho could hear, but her sister was always looking forward to her next meal. She wondered if her mom had made a special bento for the first day back, just to make Himiko smile, though she doubted there would be a glass bottle of Ramoon or a filet mignon in there, maybe some rice balls and tempura prawns. Kaho's stomach rumbled. She smiled. While Himiko looked just like their father, and Kaho took after their mum, the pair of them knew the way to their hearts were through their stomachs, a trait they shared with their older brother, Taiga, and their father. Kaho dressed in her school uniform and dried her hair, absent-mindedly checking her texts for anything else from Tatsuya. She frowned, pursing her lips. Nothing. No, "I hope you have a good day" text. Nothing about her first day of school at all. She sent one, a prompt, telling him to send one back. Passive-aggressively, yes, but not in a whiny, desperate girlfriend way. Kaho's stomach growled again, and she sighed, putting on her slippers and making her way downstairs, calling for her cats. There was no sign of Rana, but that wasn't uncommon. While Tama loved the home comforts of scratches under her chin whenever she wanted, Rana loved roaming the neighborhood, a regular neutered Lothario. She found Tama on the small balcony on the 2nd floor, sitting on the edge of the railings, sunning herself as the day broke over the roofs of nearby homes. She let out an involuntary yelp and snatched the cat from the edge. She scolded her cat and put her down on the patio. Tama purred, brushing her cheek against Kaho's leg before darting back into the room. Kaho glanced over the railings of the patio and sighed. There was something about the sun, this view, the way the daylight gently caressed her street each morning, that just made her insides bubble up and fizz with anticipation. Whether Tatsuya had sent her a good luck text or not, she knew today was going to be good. She stretched again, her fingers splayed outward as if she could brush the sun's hands with her own. She made a fist and put it to her chest. She didn't have time to bask in the sunlight. Not today. "Who left the patio door open? Tama could have fallen," Kaho said, scuttling down the stairs. She shook a box of treats, summoning Tama to her side. She ate a treat from her palm. "Oh, Kaho, sweet," her mum said, giving her a quick squeeze. It'll have been Taiga, before he went on his run. He was doing his workout out there. You know what boys are like. Kaho scowled. Taiga wasn't a boy. He was her stupid brother, but he was also in his 20s and had no excuse. She crossed her arms. "I'll feed Tama and Rana. Let me just fetch him. Her mom nodded. Okay, love. Kaho was on her way out of the door, but beside the house was a box wrapped in brown packing tape, her name carefully printed on the label. She stopped in her tracks and picked it up. Mum, did you order something for me? Kaho asked. No? Maybe it's from your father. Kaho nodded to herself and picked up the box. It was small, maybe the size of a shoebox, and rattled with every step, like it was full of something. She hoped it hadn't been something fragile, a gift from her father who was working overseas. Her mother handed her a pair of scissors, allowing Kaho to gracefully tear through the tape and brown paper that covered the shoebox. It was a box for Jordans, but Kaho doubted her father had sent her shoes. Taiga, yes, but not her. She opened the lid and frowned. Inside was an assortment of black envelopes neatly arranged inside. In the center of each was a unique imprinted symbol of a red heart. It looked like a sticker. Individual envelopes, addressed to Kaho, each dated in the top right corner where the stamp ought to be. It's a bunch of letters, Kaho said. Her mother glanced over Kaho's shoulder, a sense of wonder crossing her face. I wonder who they could be from. Could it be from Uncle Ginza? She pondered aloud, her gaze lingering on the stack of letters. Oh, check if it says America, maybe it is your father, sending letters to tell you something. You know how your father doesn't like all that data tracking stuff? He's a proper tinfoil hatter. Anything for me? Himiko asked. From Dad? Nope, just for me, Kaho replied, taking the stairs two at a time. She stuffed the box in the foot of her wardrobe, away from her cats and their pesky claws, stuffing the first one, with today's date etched on it, in her blazer. Was it from Dad? Himiko asked. Kaho shook her head. She doubted it, but she didn't want to let Himiko down. She didn't want her thinking that he hadn't sent his youngest daughter something. Something from Tatsuya? Mum asked, offering Kaho an out. Yes! Love letters! Mushy-gushy boyfriend stuff! Kaho lied, grabbing some treats and calling out for Rana. She listened for the tinkle of the bell she'd fastened around her cat's collar. Since Tama was very much an indoor cat, she didn't wear one, but Rana liked to wander the area, so he had a little bell on his bright blue collar. She listened, straining to hear Rana. There was a bell trilling, to the right of her house, where she then saw one of the neighbors, Tamaki, cycling past. He had a few papers left to deliver, including hers. Instead of launching it at the doorstep without looking like usual, he hollered out for her to duck. When she rightened herself, he pointed to the end of the road. Your stupid cat is down by the crossing. You should put a tracker on him. He could get hit by a car. Kaho scowled at Tamaki, but went the way he had come from to retrieve Rana. Like Tamaki had said, her cat was sitting at the end of the street by the traffic lights, as if he was waiting for the green light to signal he could cross the street. Kaho cooed, crouching down, and admiring her brazen cat, who licked his paws under the red man traffic signal. Behind her, unbeknownst to Kaho, was Tama, who had bounded after her, having been released by Himiko retrieving the newspaper. She pranced down the street, after Kaho, ready to pounce and play with Rana. She bounded over to her feline sibling and jumped over his head, landing in the road. Kaho made an inhuman sound, reaching to grab Tama and whisk her away from incoming cars. The pedestrian crossing was green, but that didn't mean people always stopped, especially cyclists and delinquents. Tama skittered off the road, just as a cramp seized Kaho's foot. She yelped, stumbling over, sending her cats running away as she went, head first toward the tarmac. But she didn't hit the road. Someone had grabbed her wrist. From the ferocity of the grip, she assumed it was her mother, or Taiga on his way home from his run. But it wasn't either of them. It was a boy, with brown eyes like molten bronze and sharp cheekbones. His dark curly hair was mostly concealed beneath a motorcycle helmet, a jacket concealing his shirt. He was beautiful, like he'd been pulled straight from a magazine. Before she could speak, He yanked her out of harm's way with a strength that made her wince. A cyclist whizzed by just as he pulled her to safety, barely missing her by inches as it sped off into the bustling traffic. Kaho's eyes widened, her heart racing as she realized just how close she had come to getting hit. She gawked at the stranger. Kaho stared up at him, wide-eyed, her pulse still hammering from the near collision. Her brain struggled to catch up with the moment, and all she could do was nod mutely. The warmth of his hand on her wrist, the intensity of his gaze, and the sheer gravity of what had just happened left her frozen in place. "Can you watch where you're going?" he snapped, his brows knitting together as his sharp gaze bore into her. Kaho blinked, stunned, her wide eyes welling with tears of shock. I didn't," she stammered, her throat tightening with the lump that was quickly forming. She hadn't meant to cause such trouble. Her foot cramped, the cat started off, and now this. Kaho looked up at him, eyes wide, welling with shocked, startled tears. "You..." His voice softened for just a moment, and something unreadable crossed his features. "You could have gotten yourself killed. What were you thinking?" His anger returned swiftly, and he scowled as he released her wrist. Kaho was taken aback by his tone. I'm sorry," she stammered, the words tumbling out. "I didn't mean to." "Next time don't be so reckless," he muttered, releasing her and stepping back. His eyes darted to the cats now safely off the road, then back to Kaho. "It's a good thing that I was passing when I was," he said, scowling. Without another word, he turned away and walked briskly toward a nearby car, the sound of the engine revving to life. Kaho, still dazed, stood frozen on the sidewalk. She wanted to say something, anything, but before she could, the car pulled away, merging with the rest of the traffic and disappearing from sight. "And you're rude," Kaho said. He might have looked like a model, but he certainly didn't seem to be a model citizen. She stomped her foot on the pavement, watching the cars pass her by. The boy was long gone. Kaho's eyes stung with unshed tears. She swallowed the lump forming in her throat. She bit her lip. Stupid cats. Maybe stupid Tamaki was right. Stupid smug Tamaki with his stupid smug face. She dug her nails into her palms and made her way home. Both Rana and Tama were happily munching on their breakfast when Kaho came back inside. Her mum raised an eyebrow at her. "You okay?" Kaho's breath hitched. She nodded, stubbornly clamping her eyes closed. "Just a bit shocked. I tripped at the crossing. I'm fine." Kaho brushed past her mother and made herself a glass of water, knocking it back, uncaring how a stray bead of water trickled down her chin. She took a few shaky breaths and clapped her hands together. "Right," she said. "Today is going to be a great day." Maybe if she said it enough times she would believe it, because after that incident at the crossing and the ire of stupid Tamaki, Kaho wasn't sure it was going to be a great day after all. Chapter 2. Kaho spotted a few of her schoolmates loitering along the familiar route to Hanagawa High School. Sayuri and her boyfriend Hikaru were arm in arm, drinking sodas from the convenience store, heads together as they spoke quietly. She'd been in their class since she was 8 years old. Sayuri had cut her hair over the break. It had been hanging toward the bottom of her shoulder blades, and was now down to her shoulders. Hikaru was gazing down at her, beaming. A wave of jealousy struck her, wishing he was with her. Some of the new first years were gawking at their new schoolmates, awed by how high schoolers carried themselves. The new students walked with trembling hands and knocking knees among the flocks of uniforms, their eyes wide like deer in the headlights. More students were trudging toward the crest of the hill by their school from the train station. That's when she spotted Mamoru, waving frantically from the other side of the street. He hadn't tied his school tie, and his blazer was tied around his shoulders. He crossed the road and slung his arm around Kaho's shoulders, greeting her with one of his winning smiles. His skin was sun-kissed and freckled from a school break abroad. "Good to be back, right, Kaho?" Kaho nodded. Can't wait. Her voice betrayed her, quieter, squeaky almost. He frowned, raising an eyebrow at her. I got you a souvenir from my holiday. Some postcards for your art. Thank you, Mamoru, that's so kind of you. He shrugged. I know you love to draw and I never take enough pictures that inspire you. Kaho held her tongue, forcing herself to refrain from commenting on how he expected his adventures to inspire her. The postcards often did inspire her, not necessarily with what was printed on the front, but the colors. Emulating photography with watercolors, let alone inks, was always tricky. But she loved to try making sunsets like the ones Mamoru gave her. She tucked the small wad of postcards he produced from his trouser pocket inside her blazer. He raised his eyebrow, catching a glimpse of the black envelope in her pocket, but turned his gaze away. You okay? Kaho asked as they neared the school gates. Mamoru shrugged, standing on his tiptoes and finding his class assignment on the bulletin board. Right at the top of Class 2A. Because he wanted for nothing, beauty, money, or intellect. Oh, there's Kikyo, catch you later. Kaho raised an eyebrow and watched him run off. She frowned and waited her turn to look at the bulletin boards. She found her name in the middle of the roster for Class 2B, along with some of her friends and usual classmates. She turned her head and saw Mariah in the queue. Kaho hollered to her, You're in 2B with me. Mariah left the queue and hugged her friend. Let's go. They walked together into the main school building, putting their shoes in their lockers and changing into their white school shoes. In the corner of her eye, she spotted Mamoru taking the stairs 2 at a time, rubbing the back of his head like he'd been struck. Kaho frowned, locking her shoes up and making her way to the stairs. Mariah followed her. They headed to their classroom, seeing familiar faces dotted around and offering the occasional greeting. What did you do during the break? Kaho asked. I wish I could have gone away like Mamoru, but I did get to leave town for a bit. I visited my auntie, but mostly stayed here. We went to Niagara Falls. No way, Kaho exclaimed. I bet you got soaked. We did, Mariah laughed. I saw one girl lay on the floor and just get completely soaked by the splashing water. It looked like it felt really good, like a release or something. Did you make a wish? Aren't you supposed to make a wish? Mariah shrugged. Can't say, otherwise it wouldn't come true. Kaho elbowed her in the ribs. Mariah laughed. My mom has wanted to go since forever. When Granddad passed, he left her money to empty the bucket. What? Like a bucket list? Kaho said, brows furrowed. Mariah shrugged. Guess so? She and Granddad were really close, you know, so she was choked up the whole time, but wow. Like, wow. Actually, wow. She opened the door to Class 2B. Some of her classmates were already inside, choosing their usual seats. Kaho liked sitting at the window, and Mariah usually sat to her right. Their chairs were unoccupied. They put their bags on their tables, staking their claim. Mariah leaned against the windowsill, gazing out at the incoming tide of students, corralled through the gates by the student council and staff, inevitably telling them all the class rosters were not only outside the classrooms, but on the other bulletin boards jotted around campus, and to stop blocking the gates. Not that anyone was listening. Please tell me you have 1,000,000 pictures, Kaho said, hands together in a false prayer, drawing Mariah's attention back, away from the crowds outside. Mariah nodded frantically. I'll show you at lunch, promise, she said, holding out her pinky finger. Kaho didn't take it. Her own gaze was snatched from the discreet manicure on Mariah's fingers by one of her classmates. She stared at him, almost daring him to move again, so she could catch a glimpse of what she thought was a black envelope, just like the ones in the box she'd received that morning. He had claimed his spot, right at the front of her column, in the seat directly in front of the teacher's desk. He was straddling his chair, his blazer hanging open, the inside pocket exposed as the back of his chair resting against his chest. He nodded as he listened to Hikaru, who leaned against the windowsill. His girlfriend, Sayuri, was under his arm, burying her face in his chest, ears bright red. Whatever Hikaru said had been embarrassing. "What are you staring at Makoto for?" Mariah stage whispered, making Kaho jump. "I'm not," she lied. "Sure, so this doesn't have anything to do with your boyfriend being all the way across the prefecture at the fancy pants school?" Mariah wiggled her eyebrows. Kaho sighed and slumped down in her seat. She fought the urge to fish out her phone from her bag and send Tatsuya a text. Even just a hi text. "Lovesick?" Mariah said gently. "Or morning sick?" "Sick of you," Kaho bit back, blushing furiously. "Are you sure?" Mariah asked, raising a brow. Kaho's cheeks burned. She reached out and swatted at the air around Mariah, who was giggling furiously, clutching her sides. "Yes, I'm sure. Tatsuya didn't. I didn't. We haven't. We didn't even go anywhere during the break. We only hung out a few times. He's busy," Kaho said, her hands flailing. Mariah's giggles were infectious, catching in Kaho's throat, and soon they were both in stitches. Mariah slumped into her chair, gasping for breath. The door swung open and another familiar face from the class barged in. Two of his friends were lounging by their usual spots in the back of the class, but he strode straight past them, making a beeline for Kaho and Mariah. Ryota and Kaho had been friends since they were, effectively, babies. He was like another annoying brother, just as irritating if not more so than Taiga. Both had a basketball in their skulls instead of an actual working brain. "Yahoo, Kaho!" "It's Yoo-hoo," she said, getting back up and elbowing Ryota in the ribs. He keeled over dramatically, landing on his knees with a thunk. Mariah's eye twitched. That would have hurt. "Not if I have a bone to pick with you," Ryota declared, slinging his arm around her shoulder, grinning. "How come you didn't tell me Taiga got a job here?" "Same reason Taiga didn't tell you," Kaho retorted, turning her nose up at him. "None of your business, Ryota." He stuck out his bottom lip, brows upturned, a caricature of a puppy dog face. Kaho rolled her eyes. "You know you'll need to try out to make his starting lineup, right?" "As if I would fail to be a starter now we've lost the whole lineup to college," Ryota snorted. "I've been practicing all break." He wasn't wrong. When Kaho and Tatsuya had gone to the park during the break, she'd seen Ryota in the basketball court, practicing his shooting, and playing one-on-one matches with his friends and the occasional stranger. Hell, one time she caught sight of him in there, spinning around in circles and attempting to shoot, as if he would be made to spend the whole pre-game setup in a waltzer or a washing machine. Kaho sighed. "I know, I'm sure you'll do great. Taiga just didn't want you to get the drop on your underclassmen." Ryota rolled his eyes and crossed his arms. "Whatever you say." "I mean it," she protested. Ryota sighed, trudging to his friends, who jostled him, jeering with them, a chorus of sounds that made no sense. He babbled on, grinning and shoving them. Kaho smiled and turned her attention back to Mariah. "You okay?" "Huh? Yeah," Mariah said, running a hand through her hair. "Hey, Kaho?" "Yeah." Mariah's eyes flickered from Makoto to Hikaru to Sayuri and back to Kaho. Kaho frowned. "What's up, Mariah?" Mariah didn't get the chance to ask her question. She was interrupted by the warning bell. The rest of the class rushed through the halls, their school shoes squeaking against the varnished floors. As everyone made their way inside, followed by a short, balding man in a blue and white checkered shirt and brown trousers. He had small rectangular glasses perched primly on the edge of his nose. He pushed his glasses up and rummaged in his leather satchel, removing a thermos flask and some tea-stained paper. Hiro-sensei was one of the maths teachers at Hanagawa High School, and their homeroom teacher for the year. He'd taught Kaho in her first year, and his short, wheezy breathing in cold season had drawn her classmates into a frantic mission to sneak earplugs into school. But it was only homeroom. She could handle his breathing for half an hour each day. Though, she wasn't sure some of the other girls could. They were already scowling, and Hiro-sensei hadn't even taken attendance. As he did, Kaho lowered her head and produced the letter in its black envelope, prizing it open gently with her fingernail. Nobody looked her way as she pulled the sheets of paper from inside the envelope, each word completely clean and effortless to read, not a smudge in sight among the perfectly printed kanji. Dear Kaho, if you're reading this, then you're probably wondering what's going on, where those letters came from, and what is going on. My name is Kaho too, and I'm you, but from the future, I'm from a different dimension of light within the same planet. And you don't need to believe me right now, but you will. It's important that you do. Kaho frowned, furrowing her brows, and continued to read, her mind whirling through half-assed notes she'd made during science lessons. Surely the only times they'd talked about alternative universes had been in jest. There wasn't any proof. No real tangible proof from a lab, at least. Just those letters, claiming that they were from another timeline. This was probably just a prank. A very well-orchestrated prank. Yet Kaho felt a tug, deep in her gut, that something on those pages needed to be read. It was like magnetism. She wondered if bookworms felt like this all the time, and made a mental note to ask the girl behind her, Mori, if she felt like that when her favorite authors released books. Would that be weird? Would she want to talk about books after? Kaho frowned. Maybe not. She turned back to the pages laid out in front of her. I know this sounds crazy, but I heard from someone about the possibility of these letters getting to you. Soon you'll find out how this is possible. But for now, I need your help. There's this really, really special person for me that was detrimental to me and our world. His name is Nasaru Matsuoka. In my timeline, I failed. Delivery Message Protocol. Light Novel, Volume 1. Chapter 3. Kaho bit her lip and squinted down at the papers. She rubbed her eyes and blinked frantically, but the words didn't change. To show you that I am you, I'm going to tell you things only you and me would know. Himiko sang all morning about food and drove your mum crazy. She said she wanted filet mignon and dauphinoise potatoes, a bottle of Ramoon and Twinkies. Your mum will buy her those in a few weeks and she'll hate them because they taste like polystyrene. But a kid can dream, can't she? Not good enough? After all, Himiko always led with her stomach. Don't worry. You and stupid Tamaki have been enemies since he pushed you off the swings when you were 5. You threw wood chips and sand in his face. He doesn't remember why he hates you, but knows it as a truth that is as real as the air he breathes. But you remember. This morning, stupid Tamaki said that Rana would be hit by a car if you don't buy a tracker for him, and you can't shake the feeling that that stupid kid might actually be right about something. You don't have to listen to him. But listen to me when I say investing in cat trackers saves you a lot of time in the lead-up to your entrance exams next year. You also nearly got hit by a rude guy riding a motorcycle this morning, because Tama tried to play with Rana on the side of the road. Your cats are many things, but intelligent? Maybe not. You thought the rude guy was cute, attractive, even if he wasn't kind to you. And you feel guilty because you love Tatsuya. Kaho's eyes widened. She clenched her teeth, forcing them together to keep her mouth from falling slack. How would anyone else know those different things? Private things like Himiko's dream bento, and old things like the start of her feud with stupid Tamaki? How did they know about the guy in the vehicle, if it wasn't actually Kaho? She hadn't even gone out to fetch Rana when she opened the box. She swallowed the lump in her throat and reshuffled the papers so she could continue reading. Right now, in your timeline, Nasaru is in danger, and you're the only one who can save him. All the letters I've sent will give you detailed instructions about what you should correct personally so that it can interconnect with the protocol being sent to help your generation save yourselves morally and interpersonally, and better yet, save the planet from nuclear disaster. Letters with details on what to do. Please, Kaho, you have to help me save Nasaru. That's one of the first steps. Don't worry. There'll be many opportunities, but you have to notice the opportunities. I'll do everything to remember and list the events in these letters, so that you can remember and understand the patterns and the sequences ahead. Those sequences, those paths will determine so much for you and Nasaru, who will be transferring from the United. Kaho frowned. The name, Naseru Matsuoka, was so familiar on her tongue, in her ears, in her head and heart. It felt like a cleaver tearing her in two. Something so familiar, she recited it in her head. The syllables like her heartbeat, her pulse in her ears. She took a long, deep breath and frowned. Kaho's sights went from the familiar handwriting on the paper to the student that was being introduced at the front of the class. That's when Kaho focused back to what the teacher was saying. Class, our new student that'll be joining your group a bit late this 10th grade of yours is Mr. Matsuoka, transferring from Tokyo to our prefecture's school here at Hanagawa. Kaho's head snapped up. Isn't there a Matsuoka in the graduating class this year? Sayuri whispered, kicking Hikaru's chair. He nodded vigorously. He was the volleyball captain, he whispered back. Kaho nodded. It was just a familiar surname, common enough. It didn't mean anything. It didn't need to mean anything. She looked over at the new student, stood at the front of the class. He was tall, slender, and had curly dark hair braided that went back into a ponytail, jutting out in different directions. His eyes were like molten bronze. Kaho winced, her lips parting as she gawked up at him. This was the boy in the vehicle. Naseru had kept her from being hit by a car, and now he was in her class, staring out at the class, staring at her. Hello, everyone. I'm Naseru Matsuoka. I'm transferring from Higashi Tech Private High. I come from a family of basketball athletes, though I'm not too keen on pursuing that now. I've lived in Tokyo and overseas in the States. I've lived in Virginia, Washington, Montana, Chicago, and New York, so I've moved a lot. I may be a bit reserved at times, but please don't take offense. I'm looking forward to getting to know all of you. Naseru bowed his head and looked over at Hiro-sensei. He nodded and allowed Naseru to take his seat, gesturing to the seat in front of Kaho. Kibata Mai's seat. Mei hadn't come to class. Kaho frowned. Mei had 100% attendance last year. Why wasn't she in class? Now, Mr. Matsuoka, please take your seat, said Hiro-sensei. Emi, Mei's friend and desk neighbor, raised her hand. Sir, that's Mei's seat. Hiro-sensei cleared his throat. Kibata Mai will not be joining us this year. Emi's eyes widened and her lip trembled. Why? I'm not at liberty to discuss that, Miss Sato. Now, Matsuoka, please, Hiro-sensei said, gesturing to the seat on Emi's left, the seat in front of Kaho. Matsuoka glanced at the teacher. I'll take my seat now. That guy has to be lying that many places while in school? Mariah whispered to her. Kaho ignored her. He does seem foreign, but to transfer here as a 10th grader? What could that be about? Sayuri whispered to Hikaru. He shrugged. Kaho swallowed the lump rising in her throat. Emi was on her phone, brazen, wide-eyed, and furiously texting. Miss Sato, put the phone away. But sir, I haven't heard from Mei since the last day of school. It's like she disappeared. Miss Sato. But Mei! Miss Sato, I won't ask you again. Emi glared at him and pressed a button on her phone screen, a blue speech bubble sending to a contact. Hiro-sensei cleared his throat and held his hand out to Emi, who put her phone back in her breast pocket, glaring defiantly at her homeroom teacher. She crossed her arms. He couldn't take it, and she knew it. She heard someone whistle, impressed. It's away! Hiro-sensei swore under his breath, ran his hands through his thinning hair and sighed. He walked to the front of the class. He cleared his throat again and had a sip of his tea from the thermos, spilling a dribble of it on his shirt. He sighed, pushed his glasses up and gazed out at the class. While the whispers still echoed through the room, they'd stopped being about Matsuoka and were instead about Emi and Mei. Emi scowled, brows raised, baiting Hiro-sensei to say something. But he didn't. Makoto, raise your hand, Hiro-sensei commanded. Makoto sat up, raising his hand in the air, fingers outstretched like he wanted to touch the light fixtures. Now stand. Makoto obeyed, getting to his feet. He stared at Hiro-sensei, who gestured toward Naseru, toward Kaho. Makoto, you will be Matsuoka's buddy. You will show him around and make him feel comfortable. Do I make myself clear? Makoto nodded furiously and returned to his seat, his chair scraping the varnish from the wood. Kaho sighed to herself. The unsettled feeling in her stomach hadn't eased. If anything, it was worse. Her heart was hammering and she felt sick. Kaho rummaged through her school bag for her water bottle and took 3 generous sips. The bell rang, signaling that the teachers needed to move classes. A timetable that Kaho hadn't paid any attention to was drawn on the chalkboard in front of her. They had maths first. Maths with Hiro-sensei, apparently, since he was unmoving. Emi sighed, her scowl deepening. Kaho's stomach was in knots, cramping and aching with every breath. She felt queasy. She got to her feet, raising her hand to address Hiro-sensei. "Excuse me. May I go to the bathroom, please? I'm not feeling well." Hiro-sensei pressed his lips into a fine line and sighed audibly. "We're soon about to start a lesson, Ms. Aigawa. Can you wait a little longer?" Kaho bit her lip and swallowed the lump in her throat, grabbing her water bottle and taking another 2 large sips. She didn't ask again, but the first page of her maths book was, effectively, empty, just containing a few basic calculations. Her head had been swimming with information, and it felt like with every breath she took, she would be sick. She didn't ask to be excused again. Mariah prodded her with a pencil as the lesson was concluding. Kaho turned her head, and Mariah gave her a thumbs up. Kaho swallowed again, reaching for her water bottle. Throughout the lesson, she'd almost drained all of it. She sipped more and shook her head. "What was that you were reading?" Kaho swallowed. "Got a bunch of letters this morning. In a box?" Mariah's eyes widened in recognition. She nodded. "I did too. They're in black envelopes with some red sticker thing on the front. They have numbers on them. Dates?" Kaho nodded. "I'm just curious." During Kaho's second and third periods, her attention veered from the notes on the board, mostly about the upcoming exam season, the core modules and texts they would be studying, and a brief series of keywords, which she wrote down non-committedly back to the letters. A few of her classmates were reading theirs instead of paying attention. Kaho saw Maki's breath hitch from across the classroom. She dropped her pencil, decapitating the cute animal rubber that clung to the top. The severed capybara head rolled toward the teacher's shoes. She diligently picked up the eraser and put it back on Maki's desk. She wiped her eyes on her sleeve and reattached the capybara's head to its body. "Are you okay, Miss Itu?" Maki nodded, covering up the pages of what Kaho assumed was her own letter. "Just tired, late night last night. Sorry." The teacher nodded and turned to the whiteboard, resuming the third period history lesson. Maki's eyes flickered back to the papers. She stuck one finger in her mouth and bit down. A small bead of blood trickled toward her knuckle within minutes. Kaho felt sick. What on earth was on Maki's papers? Did it matter? Maybe a previous iteration of Maki knew something that Kaho's Maki now knew. She was restless in her chair, her restless leg bouncing up and down under her desk, more blood trickling from her hand onto her sleeve. When the bell rang for lunch, Kaho, who had drunk all of her bottle of water, ran from the classroom, Maki on her heels. She felt sick. She was sure, after chomping on of her finger for the best part of 20 minutes, Maki felt sick too. Maki shoved past Makoto and Nasaru, but Kaho hung back, watching Mariah, who pointed down a floor to the canteen. Kaho nodded and brushed past them. Makoto was asking about whether Nasaru had a tour of the premises already, and explaining that each floor had its own facilities. And as the second-year class, on the second floor of the building, aside from the shoe lockers. Nasaru frowned. "I know where I'm going, thanks." Kaho ran into the girls' bathroom, slamming the first cubicle door shut and locking it behind her. She retched and vomited into the toilet, wiping her mouth on some tissue. In the cubicle across for her, she could hear Maki too. Maki flushed her toilet and swilled her mouth out with water, spitting into the sink. Kaho went after her. She tidied herself up and washed her hands, and swilled her own mouth out, but then returned to the cubicle. The second-year bathroom now distinctly stank of vomit. Kaho was surprised more girls hadn't come to be sick. She knew Mariah and Maki had had letters. Was it only them? Kaho frowned. She opened her letter again and shuffled through the papers to read the rest. If only you knew the horrors your classmates and friends would be subjected to in the polluted, viciously tampered, attacked, sabotaged environment. Then again, maybe it's better that you don't. Because I want this you, the you I wasn't, to be able to make the changes to stop it. You won't be the only one, Kaho, who gets letters like this. It's a plan, you see? But we don't know who or what the rest of us seek to correct. To someone like Eiji, Ryota's friend, he might tell his past self to pass the basketball to someone else in the preliminary match so he doesn't get embarrassed when he misses, because he thinks fixing his pride is an important step. He might not care to remember when he missed a shot after all this time. But we are all trying to keep you from making mistakes. Catastrophic mistakes. You've come this far, Kaho, and you're probably really confused. I would be too. This is a lot to take in, but I want to explain it to you properly. You and I coexist in parallel times, at different points. And in my world, people were selfish and started a domino effect. Bad decisions, wrong decisions that changed our world for the worse. We are suffering through famines, illness, and loneliness where I am now. I don't want that for you, Kaho. When I think of you, I think of how giddy you were to go back to school, and how much you loved your boyfriend. How you thought a catastrophe was the canteen shop only having melon bread left instead of milk bread or curry buns. And how much you adore your cats. You were good. I'd like to think I'm still good, somewhere here. Which is why I want the best for you. We are malleable as teenagers, willing to listen, learn, and change. Not always for the better, either. Adults aren't. That's why I'm trusting you, Kaho, the you reading this right here and now, to save Naseru and change the trajectory of the dominoes. You have to change your future. Kaho felt sick again, but she'd kept her friends waiting. How long had she been hiding in a bathroom stall reading? How long had it been since Maki left? She took a deep breath and left the restroom. In the hallway, she almost completely collided with a boy walking past. She winced, screwing her eyes shut. "I'm sorry," she squeaked. There was no reply, just a tap on her head, like she was being poked by a fingernail. She unscrewed one eye and peeked upward. Looking down at her, an amused smirk on his face, was Naseru. Her breathing hitched. He shook his head and went to pass her by. Naseru looked back at her and throws something for Kaho to catch. It landed almost perfectly in her open palms. Her eyes widened. In her hands was a small juice box, blackcurrant and apple-flavored, from the vending machine outside. She smiled. "What's that for?" Kaho asked. "You looked sick. This mixed juice drink isn't too cold. This should help put your stomach at ease." Kaho opened her mouth to say something, protest she wasn't feeling sick, or thank him. She wasn't sure. But before she could speak, Naseru spoke up again. "Don't get the wrong idea, I just don't want you barfing on me later in the class since you sit behind me," he said with a self-satisfied smirk. Kaho pursed her lips and looked him up and down. "Thank you, Matsuoka." Naseru shrugged and went on his way. Kaho watched him go. She frowned. On the road this morning, he had been so rude to her, and in class he hadn't even deigned to look at her. He'd looked at Emi, who had spent the whole morning fidgeting after her argument with Hiro-sensei. She was pretty sure he'd taken a look at everyone in the class, eyed the boys up, assessed the girls with his gaze. Everyone but Kaho, like he was a lion on the hunt for the weak link. But this was kind, considerate. Was that Naseru's true nature?